Today, we're diving into one of the most profound and honestly one of the most misunderstood stories ever told about faith and suffering. Get ready because we're taking a deep look at the book of Job.
For most of us, the story of Job is pretty simple. It's the ultimate lesson in patience and just kind of taking it on the chin.
Yeah, but what if I told you that's just the wrapper? The story you think you know is really just the beginning, and what's actually inside is so much more raw, so much more complex, and in the end, way more powerful. All right, so let's start with the basics, the familiar story that sets the stage for everything else.
So who was this guy Job? Well, the text paints him as basically perfect. He's described as blameless and upright, he's incredibly rich, and he's so devout that God himself points to him as the gold standard of righteousness. He is, for all intents and purposes, the perfect man.
Now, this is where we meet a really key character, and one that is super misunderstood, the Satan. It is so important to get this right. The Hebrew here doesn't mean the devil like we think of him today. It literally means the adversary, or the accuser. Think of him as a member of God's heavenly court, kind of like a prosecuting attorney whose job it is to test and challenge humanity.
So this accuser shows up and essentially makes a bet with God. He says, look, the only reason Job is so faithful is because you've given him everything. His life is easy. He wagers that if you take away all the blessings, his wealth, his family, his health, Job will curse you to your face, and God takes the bet.
And what follows is just horrific. Job loses everything, his animals, his servants, all 10 of his children, and then he's hit with this awful skin disease. And yet, through all that, he says this famous line, becoming the poster child for patient suffering. This is the Job we all know. But this is where the story takes a massive turn. Because after 2 chapters of this quiet, accepting man, the book just completely shifts gears. We're about to meet a second Job, and he is very, very different.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. The book switches from simple storytelling to this fiery, complex poetry. The patient man is gone. In his place is a man in total agony who curses the very day he was born. The difference is absolutely jarring. So, how can these two be the same person?
Well, the answer is in how the book was put together. Scholars are pretty much all in agreement that the book of Job is a composite work. You've got this ancient, simple folktale about a patient guy, that's the frame tale, that a brilliant poet later used as a container for this deep, complex poetic core. The poet took the old story and used it to ask much bigger, much harder questions.
And most of this poetic section is taken up by this long, really painful debate between Job and 3 of his friends who show up to comfort him. But let me tell you, their idea of comfort quickly turns into accusation.
See, his friends are all working from this one really common idea, divine retribution. It's a pretty simple concept. God is just, so he blesses good people and he punishes bad people. If you're successful and happy, you must be good. But if you're suffering, well, you do the math.
You can see their logic laid out right here. It's like a perfect but totally brutal math problem. 1. God is just and only punishes the wicked. 2. Job, you are suffering like nobody's business. 3. Therefore, you must be wicked. They're completely trapped by their own rigid logic.
And this is the devastating result of that logic. To defend their idea of God's justice, they have to attack their friend. When Job keeps saying, I'm innocent, they have no choice but to start inventing sins for him. Eliphaz here literally accuses him of horrible things. They go from being comforters to being cruel accusers.
So after 35 chapters of this back and forth, Job has had it. He tells his friends to get lost, and he looks up to the heavens and demands a trial with God himself. He wants his day in court. And then, a voice answers him out of a whirlwind. But here is the absolute shocker of the entire book. God never answers Job's question. He never once explains why Job suffered. That central mystery, it's left completely hanging. What God does instead is so much more profound. He doesn't give an explanation. He unleashes this storm of cosmic questions that no human could ever hope to answer. He's not trying to prove Job is a sinner. He's showing Job the sheer, mind-boggling scale of a universe that he simply cannot comprehend. So God isn't justifying the suffering. He's completely reframing the conversation. He's revealing a world that is wild and vast and operates on principles that go way beyond our simple little ideas of reward and punishment. The universe, God seems to be saying, was not created just for us.
And to really hammer this point home, God describes these two monstrous, untamable creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. These things aren't useful to people. They are pure, raw, chaotic power that exists for their own sake. They're a metaphor for a world that can't be neatly controlled or explained by our tidy little systems.
After this completely overwhelming encounter, Job is silenced. He doesn't get an answer, but he gets a brand new perspective. And with that, the very idea of what faith means is transformed.
The book leaves behind the simple piety of the first few chapters and gives us something far more mature, far more resilient. It suggests a new kind of faith, one that doesn't need all the easy answers, one that can survive even in the face of deep mystery and terrible suffering.
So what does this new faith look like? Well, it's not about being a passive doormat. It's about active, honest, even angry engagement with God. It's a faith that embraces the struggle, that wrestles with doubt and questions. It's about trusting that God is present even when you have no idea what God's plan is. It's a faith that values being real over being pious.
And that's the question the book of Job leaves us with, a question that really challenges the very core of what we think faith is all about.
If you found this explainer helpful, inspiring, entertaining, and informative, please go ahead and share, like, and subscribe. We'd love to have you back for the next upload. Thank you.